Free Japan Channel number 177. Today, March 19th, Thursday, 2026. The time is 5 p.m. Good afternoon, everybody. Today's topic of SJC is Japanese Constitution. The Constitution is a basic law of the country. Every law is based on this constitution. So it is a very, very important basic law. And do you know how the Constitution of Japan was made? In fact, this Constitution of Japan was made by GHQ people. GHQ means General Headquarters. This group or this organization was established immediately after the end of Pacific War. So in 1945, Japan capitulated to the United States and General MacArthur came to Tokyo to rule Japan as a winner of the war. And General MacArthur organized this group, General Headquarters, GHQ, and these people made Constitution of Japan at the time. So it was from 1945 autumn winter and 1946 winter spring. At first, Japanese people advocated that we Japanese could make our constitution, or we could revise our Great Japan Empire Constitution, which was enacted in Meiji era. Constitution was already there or here in Japan, and Japanese people or Japanese high-ranking politicians insisted that the revision of Great Japan Empire Constitution is sufficient. Revision is sufficient. And Mr. Matsumoto was the minister who was in charge of this constitution in 1945 and 1946. And Mr. Matsumoto made some preliminary constitutional draft, submitting it to the GHQ. However, GHQ people at the time refused it to be insufficient for the coming change of post-war era. In other words, Matsumoto draft was too conservative for GHQ to accept it. Then GHQ wrote the draft of new Japanese constitution in their own way, and then the draft came to Japanese ministers. At the time, the prime minister was Mr. Kijuro Shidehara, and the foreign minister was Shigeru Yoshida. And the minister in charge of constitution was George Matsumoto. Mr. Matsumoto has the name George Matsumoto, and this George was named after George Washington. The father of this minister was a vehement advocate of George Washington. Therefore, he named his son after George Washington. Therefore, curiously speaking, Mr. Matsumoto has the name of George Matsumoto. At the time, Shidehara was in the position of prime minister. Shidehara was from foreign ministry, and Yoshida was also from foreign ministry. At the time, immediately after the war, Japanese high-ranking politicians were dominated by the people who came from foreign ministry. Shidehara and Yoshida were diplomats in one word. They could speak English. It was one of the reasons they were chosen Prime Minister of Japan. Shidehara and Yoshida were chosen by GHQ, not by the consensus of Japanese people, not by election. And they noticed that this draft from GHQ was really different, totally different from original Matsumoto draft. And they kicked it around by themselves. And they got the conclusion that they had no choice but to accept it. Of course, Japanese bureaucrats had to modify this US or GHQ draft into the form of Japanese political climate, Japanese political situation. In the process, Japanese bureaucrats, contrived the constitution which could be the basis of New Japan. Therefore, we can say now that Constitution of Japan was the product of GHQ and Japanese bureaucrats at the time. It was 1946, 1 year after the end of Pacific War, that the Constitution of Japan was in effect. Since then, already 80 years have passed. 80 years. During these 80 years, the world has changed. So has Japan. But this constitution was never modified, never amended. This is a very curious situation, isn't it? The world is already changing. Constitution should not be modified so often because it is a basic law. However, 80 years have passed and no modification. This is very strange situation, but this is the reality of Japan. Japanese people are so afraid of amending this constitution. The most important article is Article 9, which includes the description of force, military force. Surprisingly enough, Article 9 declares that Japan will not have any military force. No army, no navy, no air force. Of course, GHQ people wrote this article for fear that Japan would become militarized country again. However, in the reality, this is far from realistic approach to international affairs. Don't you think so? Now, 2026, No country in the world has declared that they have no weapons, no force, because they want to be peaceful country. No country has ever proclaimed that they would have no force because they desire the world peace. World peace is, of course, very important and we should respect it, and any war should be avoided. Of course, we can agree with it. But it has nothing to do with armament of a country. In the daily life of our individual life, we lock the key when we leave the house. This means there might be some possibility that somebody would come into our house or apartment. Of course, we take it for granted that nobody would come in, but there might be somebody who would come into our residence. Therefore, we lock the door, we lock the key. On the national scale, this key or this lock is literally armament or force. Therefore, Japanese constitution said that Japan has no lock, no key on the door. So unrealistic writing. But this is Japanese constitution. After that, Japan was forced to establish some kind of military force. Now we have self-defense force, which is the source of our relief against Chinese threat or North Korean threat. Self-defense force is the source of our relief of our citizens. But this is against Constitution, literally. Supreme Court of Japan ruled that self-defense force is a very highly political matter that the Supreme Court cannot decide whether it is constitutional or unconstitutional. Very curious argument of the Supreme Court of Japan, but this ruling backs up the existence of self-defense force, and it was the United States that forced Japan to make it in 1950s because of the Cold War against Soviet Union. Korean War, which broke out in 1950, was an immediate clue, immediate starting point for Japan to have self-defense force. At first, it was a kind of police organization, but this police organization became bigger and bigger gradually, and then self-defense force. Now, Japanese self-defense force has air branch, army branch, navy branch, and they have weapons, and they have battleships, and they have combat plane. And as I said, it is the source of relief for Japanese citizens against surrounding countries. Don't you think that we Japanese people should amend this unrealistic Article 9 to adopt it more flexibly into the reality? I am one of the people who think so, but the people who think so are minor or minority in Japanese society. It's staggering. Most Japanese people now think that we don't have any need to amend this constitution. Constitution debate or constitution discussion is a kind of taboo in Japanese society. This is not discussed at school, in the family, or in the office, nor in the diet, in the local parliament. We cannot discuss this matter of amendment of Japanese constitution anywhere. This is a very curious situation. Nobody can touch it. Japanese people know well that the peace of 80 years was guaranteed by the existence of American Army and Navy. There are so many American bases in Japanese territory still now. Now I live in Yokohama. Yokosuka city is a near city from here, and there, huge American fleet is there, Yokosuka port, and big carriers come in and out there. It was formerly Great Japan Empire Navy bases. However, in the post-war era, American Navy got a base there at Yokosuka. And we, Japanese people, don't know well about the base or about the carrier or about other battleships which there. And in Okinawa, so much land is now occupied by US military force. The territory of Okinawa is eroded by the US force. Of course, some people say that this US force pay the rent to Okinawa landowner, and this money is galvanizing Okinawan economy. Of course, there might be some aspect of this economic boost from the money of US military force in Okinawa. However, most Okinawan people think that we should, or Japanese people should, get rid of this US force, US bases from Okinawa as soon as possible. Japanese constitution is a very strange constitution, but virtually no Japanese people want to amend it, though they know very well that this constitution is out of date, is not congruous to the reality. Japanese constitution, we should discuss it. We Japanese people should talk about it. Now is the time for us to embark on amendment of this constitution, because this constitution no longer valid in the present situation. Thank you.